Hi everyone, welcome to Level of Detail, brought to you by University of Staffordshire's Games Institute. I'm Dr Sharon Coleclough, and today I am joined by, I want to call you just the professors, but I am joined today by Professor Esther MacCallum-Stewart and Professor Catherine Flick. Oh. Hello, welcome to Level of Detail. Hello. Again?
Nope, not for me. First time.
First time.
First time.
Not for, oh yeah, right.
Newbie.
You're a newbie. How have you managed to avoid it all this time?
Well, I volunteered, but I wasn't voluntold, so. Today, or volunchosen.
Yes. So we're going to step away from battles, we're going to step away from high scores, big explosions, and we're going to explore a little bit more of a wholesome gaming journey, that wholesome side of gaming.
Wholesome.
Although, wholesome, yeah, because I've heard some stories about Animal Crossing. So let's get comfortable and join us as we dive into the relaxing world of Cosy Games. And today we're going to play Stardew Valley. So, I guess the first question, because I know I kind of know this, but let's get a definition of it. Esther, can you give me an idea? What's a cosy game?
Okay, so Cosy Games started with games like Farmville, Rune Factory, Harvest Moon, often farming games, but also started as parts of other games. So, for example, aspects like the fishing in Zelda. I'm actually fishing right now on the screen, or getting my fishing rod anyway.
Get ready, yep.
And Cosy is often described not as a genre, but as an aesthetic. So it's this idea of comfort, of often gathering things that will make you feel better, and making things, like making jam or selling tea and coffee. So it's all about things that make you feel comfortable and relaxed and happy.
So kind of like the history of Cosy Game as a concept is more taking these elements that are found in other games and kind of building that aesthetic. Would that be like fair to say?
It's a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B, because things like Farmville existed on their own, and obviously Harvest Moon, Rune Factory, which I just mentioned before, are games in their own right. And they were sort of both adopted by and developed on their own as well. I think we sort of, because there's sort of quite a lot of elements of casual gaming, or what is sometimes seen as casual gaming in Cosy, there's a temptation to say they evolved from other games, whereas actually I think they sort of are pretty much their own genre, and they're so varied now as well. Like, what was the one you were?
So I've been recently playing a game called Kaizen, a factory store, which is a new game out, and it's basically where you make items in a factory. You set up a production line essentially, and it's basically a puzzle game, but it's also kind of cozy. There's a story with it. There's sort of this underlying kind of critique of capitalism, which I think we're starting to see more of these kind of more outside the box, kind of away from the classic kind of farming games like Stardew and stuff like that, and more of these kind of ones that are trying to be a little bit subversive. So it's there's a whole different, like, there's a bunch of different things you can do in Cosy Games, and also Cosy is sort of it's like I said, it's an aesthetic. So it's also about the feeling that it creates when you come to play a game. So some people's Cosy might not be other people's Cosy, and Cosy itself is just is kind of a bit of a vague.
Is it like a catch-all in a way for sort of the way it kind of makes you feel and the style of gameplay?
It's about if you can come back and you can feel relaxed and it kind of takes you away. A lot of it is about this kind of escapist side of things. So it puts you into a place where all of your things are all your needs are mostly taken care of. You can kind of just live out your fantasy of being a woodcutter in a forest, or
because we've done some real damage today on the trees.
We have already done some damage to the trees.
We were cutting trees down. They were absolutely massacring the outside of the houses to build and plant.
So the backstory is often really similar. Like, this is a really classic backstory. So in the opening sequence, you are an office worker. You're having a really terrible time. One of your colleagues is so tired and fed up of their job, they are actually a skeleton as the sea. They've just died of boredom and unhappiness. And then you inherit a farm. And in Stardew, you have a period of time in order to make the farm the best it can possibly be, but you can just play indefinitely. And that's a really, really classic kind of cosy narrative
of leaving something, moving somewhere. It's sort of Animal Crossing. Can I put that in that bracket?
Exactly the same.
We move to a new place, although there's, I think, chatting earlier, there's some debt already kind of in there for you. So with some of that in mind, that idea of escape, that idea of moving somewhere else, is that why cozy games have become sort of so popular and almost thought of as like a genre in their own right, because people want that escapism?
Well, I think also that if they became, I mean, Stardew was quite big before the pandemic, but I think as cozy games as a genre really exploded during the pandemic because people couldn't get outside and do their things that they would like normally do, and they were locked down and things were on. And so basically and it just so happened that the release of Animal Crossing coincided with the pandemic, and it was a way for people to kind of have that escapism within their own houses, but also there was sort of a multiplayer aspect, so you could go and visit your friends, for example, and which you couldn't do in real life, right?
Yes.
And so a lot of that became part of the COVID lockdown kind of narrative. The discourse around how people lived their lives online, and this kind of fed into that as well as part of that. Well, we can still be friends, we can still hang out and we can, also have this kind of space that we can make our own, that isn't the space that we're in, which might be cramped and horrible. It might be a nice, a tropical island where we have, pretty furniture. We're not sort of stuck on an old sofa in front of our TV or whatever all day.
And a lot of these games involve a lot of touching people as well, not in a sexual sense, although there is a lot of romance in these games, but giving them stuff. So you give somebody some clothing to make them happy, or you give them some jam, or you give them even some seeds that you found. So again, some of the things that couldn't be done during lockdown were absolutely front and centre of these games. The other thing is that the World Health Organization, the year before COVID, had declared games as kind of dangerous and addictive and problematic, and they pivoted 180, and they released this massive initiative called, I think it was Alone Together, or it might have been Together Alone. I always get it mixed up with the Crowded House album.
Yes. It sounds right either way.
Yes,
we'll
it
go
sounds
with
right
that.
either way,
Perfect.
doesn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
And so they suddenly said, oh, it's really important that you start playing lots of cooperative games. And they very specifically looked for fitness games. It was the other really, really big seller was the Ring Fit.
Yeah.
So a movement game that you could play indoors. And Stardew was one of the cooperative ones, and in fact I think Stardew was, but Animal Crossing definitely was.
That's the one that kind of springs to my mind for the pandemic. And if we take, so we've kind of placed cozy games within sort of a period of time which was incredibly difficult for a lot of people, and gave them something very, very tangible and clear, like community, communication, all of these things. But if we take like a step back, and because this is a business, game is a business. Who does play cozy games? What is the market for cozy games?
Well, I mean,
it's a good question, right?
It is a good question. So, I mean, I have a lot of, I'm involved in communities of mostly women developers, and there are a lot of the games that female developers make tend to be on the cozier side. If they're running their own studios, or they're running their own, making their own games. Because I mean, it's sort of, I mean, you could get quite gendered in this, right? There's a lot of gendered.
That was my worry.
There's a lot of gendered aspects to these sorts of games. The idea of caring, taking responsibility for things, like looking after animals or people or the environment or whatever. But I think also it's a space where there's a bit of reclaiming of games that also appeal to women, right? And to I mean, regardless of the gendered aspects of that, but then also allow sort of for agency within those, right? So you can go and have romances, but I mean, this isn't just a thing for women, though. I mean, I've got a lot of male friends who also play these games and enjoy those aspects of them as well. So, but I think that there's a concern that you could, if you're a female developer, you can kind of get boxed into this,
and that was my concern, asking the question almost.
Right?
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, because I've kind of got some pushback against this, which is that my first experience. I mean, I've played loads of Farmville, which I don't really understand why now, because it's a really, really commercial game. But my really early experiences of cozy were, and I'm glad it's raining. It feels like it's making the point. I played a huge amount of World of Warcraft. And I was in a pretty serious raiding guild, and I loved fishing, and the rain, it just reminds me of fishing in Zangarmarsh, which I really feel was like almost designed to be this kind of incredibly, even though it's like a marsh area, it's got all these amazing mushrooms, it's beautiful. A lot of WoW is absolutely gorgeous, and what really struck me was that the sort of coziness of World of Warcraft and games like RuneCraft as well are actually also seen as beginner games, and I don't want to dismiss them as a result of that. But RuneCraft is, again, a good example of like learn to play games by learning to play RuneCraft. So it also brings in ideas of community and playing together.
Well, that's a super interesting point that you've brought this idea of kind of like, not wanting to use like the starter game thing, but almost kind of starter game. There's no real stakes involved in this. There can be if you want them to, but you can just play, as you've said, Esther, sort of infinitely. You can do whatever you want to do. So does this type of game, does this space, let's call it a space rather than a genre, because as you've correctly said, it's more of an aesthetic thing. Does it open up gaming to sort of like what you'd call new audiences, sort of something that's not quite as mainstream as, you know, when you think of game, you think of the GTAs and you think of these sorts of games. Does it open up to a new audience?
So, again, more people play casual games than they play AAA. Sorry, everybody.
Yep.
And so there's this kind of perception that game is, it's got to be violent, it's got to be like perceived masculine, it's got to have chasing and fighting in it.
Yeah, that's
and
what I
actually, if you catch a train, I did this morning and I made a point of looking, you will always see people do certain things on the train. There will be somebody who is reading, there'll be someone who's eating their breakfast, there was a person putting their makeup on, there are some people asleep, and there are people watching television or playing games. And some previous research that I actually did on this found that if you go and ask those people what they're playing, they'll say, I'm just playing something on the phone.
Yeah.
And they won't say what it is, and they'll feel, you can actually visually see kind of shame as well. And quite often they'll say really weird stuff, like they'll say things like, it's just some Candy Crush game, and you'll look down and you're like, no, that's like a flick football game, like there's no similarity there whatsoever. But actually, again, people are coming to games from different avenues than consoles. I mean, I've got a Switch, and I've actually got a Mac, not a PC, so I play PC games. But I don't have a console at the moment, and consoles are expensive and games are expensive, whereas casual or mobile games, which I think is a better description, are much less expensive and much faster to play as well. You can duck in and duck out, you're not going to die, you don't have to spend 40 minutes playing a map. And that actually appeals to people who are commuting, or who've only got 5 minutes, or who are doing something else and are rewarding themselves with play.
Yeah.
And I think, I always get a little bit, I think gendering games into men play this kind of game and women play this kind of game. I mean, it excludes queer communities for a start. Yeah. It assumes that all people, it doesn't think about things like geography or kind of types of play. There are countries where you are restricted from play by time. You can only play a certain amount of time a day, or it used to be the case. So there's all these other things that often aren't really taken into account when people think about what does game mean. And I think Cosy's a really interesting way of exploring that, because, I mean, again, we were saying earlier, it goes in so many different directions. Quite a lot of the themes are, even Stardew has got not necessarily problematic themes. This isn't like a game in which they're all suddenly going to become slaves to the machine or anything, or they're going to be taken over by a horrible power. But there is quite a lot of subtext in it that is quite unnerving if you think about it properly.
There's stories around mental health and addiction and all sorts of things just in this game itself. And I think that like all games allow you to experience something from other people's perspectives,
that's
right?
My house. No, don't go. What if it is my house?
Are you
Sorry,
into breaking and entering?
Yeah.
There's a different experience, a little bit of like breaking and entering going on.
Oh, come on.
So
coming in. Yeah, but I think it allows these games are. I mean, when they tell stories, right? And even the simplest games have some sort of story, right? And I think that they allow these.
You've leveled up.
Oh, I leveled up. It's because I've been running around bashing. I got
There's a co-op. We're running a co-op, and it's
Blundering
obviously
around.
competitive.
Yeah, obviously very competitive. Yes. Yeah. So you enter another person's. You enter another world. You're experiencing things from somebody else's perspective. But then also games. The wonderful things about games is it also allows you to shape that, right? Shape your experience and shape your of that perspective. And obviously, the more kind of open-ended games allow you more shaping and control of that, of how you experience that. And I think that allows for a lot of really interesting stories to be told from, like we're talking about sort of these are queer spaces, right? These sorts of, you can shape. I mean, you can probably play Stardew Valley extremely non-queerly if you want to, right? I mean, you could.
Why? When there are so many cute. No,
Anyway, but you could, right?
Yeah, you could.
And people do, right?
Yes,
I mean, there are people who play this purely to do things like actually be competitive about it and to min-max. They try to make the most optimal farms. They try to automate as much as possible. They try to get as far down the mine as possible. There's a whole bunch of kind of other things you can do in this game that don't even really touch on the relationships or the So there are different ways of playing this particular game. But I think that the nice thing about these kind of cozy games is really about how they open up these possibilities, right? Unlike, say, I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, when you first load up a games engine, let's say Unreal or whatever, the default thing is essentially a first-person shooter, right? And then people the classic default mechanism within a game is to either hit or punch or kill or shoot at something. And I think the nice thing about these cozy games is that you don't have to do that, right? And in fact, they often reward not doing that. There's some really good little cozy games that kind of play with that mechanic, for example. I don't want to talk about them particularly,
but can we get into mechanics and kind of like the aesthetics of cozy game, just kind of to draw a flag? Because I've just seen there's a playground in this. So, like, what are the mechanics? Let's look at Stardew Valley as a sort of our example of this. Can you point out some of the aesthetic qualities that makes this a cozy game, and maybe point out just some of the mechanics? What are we working with as a player that kind of feeds into that stuff that you were talking about, Catherine, that idea of not necessarily destroying, she says, as someone chops down a tree, but sort of kind of more developing the space and living within the space?
I mean, I think that's part of it though, right? So cozy games have got a sort of a two-sided, there's two sides to the coin here, right? So on the one hand, they offer, kind of like, not limitless, but a range of possibilities. But on the other hand, they also have a very specific narrative about how things should be, right? So humans are dominant in this particular game. We have control. I have, as a human, I am crafting this space to be how I'd like it to be. I mean, I am de-wilding it. Like, look, so, if I bash up these little plants here, I mean, that's my little wildflowers, like that's my grass gone. So I can put in a farm that is ordered, organized according to utility. I can later on automate it with little, essentially creatures that I have control over, right? I mean, I won't go too far into the, enslavement kind of narratives here, but there are games where essentially you have, all the boring parts of running a farm, which is, watering, the actual taking care of things, is often automated, so you can just concentrate on the fun parts, which is picking your produce or planting the seeds. Even planting the seeds can be automated in some of these things. So I think that there's two sides of it, right? So you have the mechanics of, yes, you can control, you can make, I mean, I can craft things if I bring up the right menu. There we go. So I can make fences and gates and signs and things and later on I can make bits of furniture and things like that as well.
Oh, animals. What does that mean in this game? Does that mean buying animals in? Does that mean?
Yes, you can eventually in the game. We haven't unlocked this bit yet, but you can get animals, so cows and sheep and chickens and things. And then you obviously have.
Hold on, chickens. You've done some research on chickens. Segue. Everyone can appreciate that. Tell us about your research on chickens.
Right. So for my sins, no, a long time ago, not that long ago, but a long time ago, I did some work with a paleopathologist friend of mine who looked at poultry, and she looked at bones of poultry. Tia Fothergill, she's now in Canada, but she and I wrote a paper about the ethics of the depiction of chickens in games, because we were playing a lot of games and we were realizing that the chickens were very poorly presented. So for example, you'd have entire flocks of male chickens, cockerels, roosters, whatever you'd like to call them, and they you would not have that in real life because they fight each other. Yeah, they do not coexist happily. But you would see these in games, you'd see entire flocks just of male chickens. You'd see male chickens presented as female chickens, so lovely combs and big flowing tails and the big feathers they have around their necks, and that would be passed off as a hen. But hens don't look like that, right? Except in very strange circumstances where you get weird sexless stuff, right? No, you can sometimes get them, but it's very rare. So the problem is that we were seeing that game developers were not actually looking at source material properly, and artists were not actually depicting chickens particularly accurately. We also noticed that a lot of the depictions of chickens in games reflected the stories that we've told about chickens for a very, very long time. So back in ancient Greece, there was Aristophanes wrote a play called The Birds, which is one of the first comedic plays, and it was about people dressed up essentially as chickens. And we often see chickens as a joke. So one of the games we looked at had mechanics were basically building machines to crush things, and I can't remember what it was called now, but anyway, one of the comedy parts of it was you could throw a chicken into the mix and it would explode in this little puff of gore and feathers, right? And so they're sort of used as the butt of jokes. But we also saw that part of the comedy is often when they bite back, right? So in Zelda, for example, you go and hit a cuckoo, however you say it, cuckoo. Anyway,
that
a chicken.
Right. Yeah, the chickens.
The chickens in Zelda. If you hit one, all of its friends will come up and they'll chase you out of town, right? So they gang up on you and fight back. And so there's this sort of comedy. There's an inherent comedy in that, but also an inherent strength in that, right? So it's about the power of the flock and numbers and things like that.
The same happens in Skyrim.
Yes, so Skyrim also. Yeah. But then also in Skyrim there are some weird mods that we found. So there's a Macho Man Randy Savage mod where basically it's a chicken mod for the player character, but it has Randy Savage lines that it says out loud. I mean, it's just very stupid, but it was obviously done for the comedic effect, right? So we're looking at, and then also there's the whole infrastructure of chickens, right? So fertilizer, feathers, meat, bones, all of the things that chickens kind of are used for or, produce are often parts of these games. So later on when you can get chickens in Stardew Valley, you can, you farm them for feathers and things like that, and you can use those feathers to make things, right? And there's the same in a lot of crafting type games where you can have, Minecraft's another one where you get meat from chickens, you get feathers from chickens and eggs and things like that, right? So that's all part of the, but a lot of these in earlier, so we're starting to see I think more recently it's becoming more aware of the importance of matching up to reality, or at least some semblance of reality, because it has improved. But certainly a lot of the earlier games, the depictions have not been great. But chickens are such an important part of our lives. They really underpin a lot of our modern economy, right? But people still sort of see them as a bit of a joke. And so the whole point of that research was to show, well, they're not really that much of a joke in reality, because they're so integrated into our lives that we're seeing them in games, and we're seeing that reflected in games and in the stories that we tell.
So that idea of telling stories and different mediums, kind of re-representing those things, and we just kind of accept that that's a chicken and that's how we kind of move forward. Yeah. Esther, the stuff that you've been talking about, that and Catherine's kind of led into it beautifully for me, that idea of we go back to Greek theatre and we have representations. Cosy games tend to cross media and mediums. Yeah. So can you tell me a little bit about that and how that's fitted into some of the work that you've been looking at?
Yeah, so I'm currently actually writing for a Cosy collection, and the thing that I'm actually doing is I'm doing the lit review chapter. which is across media, so it's not just literature. But cozy fiction really took off in 2022 with the publication of Travis Baldry's Legends and Lattes. Okay. But the thing that I found that was most interesting is that actually, although that was the first big publication, cozy was already there. So it was already there in terms of there was a lot of lit RPG that already existed, which was based on games. There were a lot of games there already. There was a lot of discussion and art of it elsewhere. And kind of Travis came along and wrote this. I mean, it's a great book.
Well, can you just to interrupt your thought, just very quick, can you just unpack like the cozy lit thing for me? Because it's not something I'm familiar with.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, again, it's a huge part of fantasy writing at the moment. It tends to follow a very, very specific pattern. So one or two people move into a town that they're not very familiar with. They set something up. It is usually selling something. So it's a bookshop, or it's a coffee shop, or it's a tea shop. There's like a war between tea and coffee. Okay. You have to choose one.
I'll go coffee.
You can't have treason without tea, and you can't have legends without lattes.
Okay.
And they gradually level up as they go through the book. So in Legends and Lattes, they start off selling basic cups of tea, and then they progress to selling coffees and Coke, coffees and soft drinks, and then they sell coffees and cake, and then they add a bookshop in the background, or their lending library, because again, everybody's being nice to each other. And so there's this very sort of, you can follow it in the same way that you'd follow a game like Stardew.
And they're leveling up and building.
And they're leveling up and building. And they're also leveling up their relationships as well.
I was going to ask, are they building friendships and relationships?
And so other people will start to come into the shop and start to be friends with them. Or they'll learn more about the people that they already know. And Legends and Lattes in particular is based around a romance between the orc Viv, and she's kind of like a tiefling, Thandri, and their romance is also sort of the second. It depends where you see the kind of key to the plot being.
Focus
but
is.
Yeah, and that's a really, really standard romantasy stroke cozy fiction. And again, I think Travis Baldry tapped into something that was already being written about a lot in fan fiction. But since then, there have been dozens and dozens of publications. Sarah Beth Durst writes absolutely loads. Rebecca Thorne. Oh gosh, I'm trying to remember their first name. The Baby Dragon Cafe, Qureshi. Again, there's a lot of authors that are kind of coming through. One of the things that's really interesting about them is that they don't always use a first name. They'll use a letter, which of course is a very traditional way in publishing of allowing the reader to guess or assume the gender of the person.
I was going to say, it opens up the queerness of the space for you to make your decisions. You were talking about the queerness of these spaces, this idea of kind of that you can choose your own adventure, which is something people hear me say a lot, but also choose the journey of your character, like what they actually engage with, don't engage with. And is that similar in the literature sort of side of things? I know it's a journey that's mapped out for you, but there's some decision making.
About to get hauled back. Sorry.
Hold back. Oh, is it night time? Are you not allowed out at night? Curfew. So in terms
I'm very
of
tired at this point.
Sorry, so tired talking and standing in a field today.
I know, right?
So, I mean, what sort of other? We're in cozy games territory. We've looked at some of the stuff that you're working on or have worked on within this idea of how it applies through to cozy games. But what's some other research that's happening around cozy games? But also, what sort of research are you kind of exploring? Because obviously we've talked about queerness, we've talked about relationships and community, and I feel that does come out in your work. So where are we going with our research at the moment? Esther, if you don't mind starting me off.
So my research right from the beginning has always looked at players and player narratives and how players tell stories about games. And I'm kind of looking at two main aspects at the moment. The first is with Catherine, and also with our colleague.
Oh, that's handy.
Our colleague Jamie Nicholas, who is this masked person, and we've just written a paper about Dragon Age Veilguard and the queer relationships in it and how queerness is presented in it. Again, because it was already happening within games, and it's also a really solid part of cozy, both literature, fiction, again, art, very much so. We found it was really easy to draw lots of examples and sort of look at the way that that's actually developing. What we noticed in all of the different types of literature and fiction and games that we looked at is that those relationships aren't problematized. They're not presented as a kind of, our love can never be, for we are gay people. It's developing the relationships in a very kind of normative and accepted way, like it's just part of the game. There's no...
So it's not a focus, it's not the driving narrative for, it's a relationship.
Yeah.
Okay.
And whilst there are still some sort of issues there, that tends to be very much the way that the worlds exist. And again, you see lots of people and creatures of different shapes and colours and sizes, and that's also part of it. So that's the first part of the research. The other part of the work that I'm doing at the moment is very much about what myself and my collaborator are calling probably games of conscience. We haven't really decided, but we've got four big C's, and they are Cosy, conscience, conflict resolution, and kindness. So we cheated on the kindness. But that's building on sort of two different arcs. Again, Cosy falls within a genre in science fiction and fantasy that's often called kind punk.
Okay.
That was started
Not
off
heard
by,
of that.
Again, it's another sort of similar but different term. Pioneered a little bit by an author called Rebecca Chambers, who writes science fiction that is, again, specifically about kindness and people being kind to each other. But what we're looking at is we're looking at the ways in which games, specifically board games, can discuss ideas of sustainability, of climate change, and basically using soft power in order to help people think about things with conscience. And so that's my collaborator on that is Douglas Brown from the University of Falmouth, and we have a whole load of things that we're doing on that.
So a term that just came up there, which you caught my attention, soft power?
Yeah. Okay. So
soft power me, Esther.
Soft power, yeah. So soft power is a political term that is used to describe political influence that's done through economic and cultural means, rather than, for example, violence or threats or military means. So a good example of this is sustainability. One country going to another and saying, let's work together on our energy efficiency, because the thing that I am doing, which I'm very good at already, will certainly benefit you economically. And so you see these kind of collaborations happen.
Got you.
I think it's a really good example of, as researchers, we're always looking at other things in order to understand our thing. And I think the sort of politicisation, like this is a term that, you know, were you to go to Brussels or the Houses of Parliament, people would completely understand it straight away. But it's really useful to integrate it into what we're looking at, and where it's kind of less understood. And we can then think, oh well, you know, how might games do that? And when I was in Falmouth, I went down there for a really long weekend, and we just played board games, and we played climate change board games, and we played games about soft power. There's a board game by a guy called Matt Leacock. He's very famous for developing the Pandemic game. So that was him.
I've never beaten Pandemic.
Yeah.
Can you, if you know him, can you tell him?
Can it be done? Can
Never
it be done?
beaten it.
Yes. But it's a sort of it's a game called Daybreak, and it's literally about communicating and cooperating together in order to think about sustainability. And we also played cozy games as well. So we played a board game called Flamecraft. And I was going to go back to one of the things that you were talking about earlier, actually, because you were talking and then you said, I'm crafting something.
Yes.
And the thing that we noticed in Flamecraft and in a couple of other games as well is that actually their themes are quite hard.
Okay.
You know, so again, the hard is under the soft. And instead of saying I'm destroying the landscape and I'm mass producing fences, you say, I'm crafting them.
Yes.
So it kind of it packages
So
it
the
in a
language
nicer way.
The language is softened. And that very much happens in Flamecraft, which is a game about helping villagers improve their shops by getting the help of baby dragons.
Okay.
So the baby dragons, which are all really cutesy and lovely, you send them to shops to kind of become helpers. They're definitely not indentured. They're definitely doing it out of the love of their heart.
Okay.
They're definitely not producing, again, mass-produced goods within the shops. But
they're crafting.
They're crafting,
Okay.
yes, and I mean, it's beautiful art. But we found this quite a lot, that actually quite a lot of games that are about the climate, or they are about cooperating together, they use a lot of very strong military backgrounds. So you have quite, I mean, one of the other games that we looked at that didn't get around to playing was a game called Spirit Island, another board game. And that one's really interesting because you play spirits who are trying to stop people from invading your island. So it's a reverse colonisation narrative, because quite often in board games in particular, say for example Risk,
It's about colonisation.
It's about colonisation, like that is the whole thing that you do. But the thing that's very interesting about Spiritcraft is they work really hard to make it not look like a military map, or kind of have the basics of a military map. And when I say military map, if you think about Pandemic, it's cities and zones and areas of connection.
I was going to say the way that these connect to each other to spread.
Absolutely.
In this case, the pandemic.
And you know, Pandemic's a very early example of a cooperative game, and there's been a lot of changes since then. But this is one of the things that we were sort of thinking about, and we were thinking about, you know, these games are sometimes cosy, they sometimes have kind motives. But the difference that we noticed, with the exception of Matt Leacock's games, which I would argue have always got conscience, is that some of the earlier games, there's kind of about things like evolution is about the climate and about progressing through various different ages on your planet and developing creatures. We actually found not only is it incredibly brutal because you're constantly evolving creatures that just die horribly.
Nice.
Yeah, we were really quite surprised.
I don't think I want to play that, but do continue.
But it feels like it doesn't have the kind of thoughtfulness that some of the later games have started, like Daybreak and Spirit Island.
There's an intention. I love the word intention. There's an intentionality behind it. I do love that word because it is that idea that there is a thought process, and there's always a thought process. Please don't get me wrong, but it feels like there has been that kind of consideration of how this is then going to be absorbed by the player and what they're going to do with that knowledge and feelings.
And I think when you're sort of thinking about soft power, you can see it a lot in Cosy. I mean, we were talking about Papers, Please earlier, which is, again, a really good example of using cultural and social influence. I mean, do you want to...
Yes, I mean, Papers, Please ideally is another Cosy sort of genre game, right? Where you
would think.
You sit,
you would think. Well, yes, and you saying that, and I kind of know what it is, and I'm like, oh,
I mean, you're not out there like shooting down, you know, like enemies. You're not out there kind of trying to. It's not even really. It's sort of a puzzle game, I guess you could say. But it's more.
It uses
mechanics
doesn't it?
Yeah. So, but it would technically be a cozy game because you're sitting essentially in an office doing an office job. But the office job that you're doing just happens to be really horrible. You're making decisions about who gets to come in and out of the country, and some of those decisions have really horrible consequences, either for yourself and your family or for the people that you're making decisions about. So it sort of subverts this kind of coziness. And I think some of the research I'm doing now, if I can jump in on that,
please.
Is that I'm also looking at some of these darker sides of Cosy. So I'm looking at blockchain.
Now you're talking to where I want to live now, the darker side.
It's probably not the sort of dark side you're into.
Shoot.
Like, sorry,
okay.
no, I don't know any horror Cosy games, but
shoot. A market has just opened up for me.
But
I mean, Dredge. I think
Dredge. I think actually,
Dredge is a
Dredge is a good one. Yeah.
Horror
but
game.
I'm looking more at the at blockchain games and a lot of Cosy style mechanics. So things like farming, for example, have been co-opted into blockchain games, and those really are the reason I say that the darker side of gaming is because essentially they enable things like gambling. Like one of the games that I've been looking at, which is called Pixels, literally has a sharecropping thing where you basically can rent out your land that you own to other people who then farm it for you. And these are real people, not in-game people. And they farm it for you and they pay you back a certain amount of the value that they get from the farming the land. And then you can, and this is real money, right? So this is
I did not realise.
This is cryptocurrency.
Just rewind that a second. I did not realise this was real.
This is real money because it's cryptocurrency.
Okay.
And so there's a lot of speculation, and basically the problem with this is that people can kind of come in as wealthy landowners and essentially farm out to poorer people who don't have the money to buy the land and do that for themselves, but they have the aspirations to own land in the future.
Yeah.
They can come in at the bottom of this ecosystem and try to work their way up.
Gosh, that's dark.
It is dark,
Yeah.
yes. So, but it uses these same sort of things. Another one, the classic blockchain game is Axie Infinity, where it's almost like a Pokemon battling style game, but it's a lot about breeding and it's sort of cozy-ish. But that was the original one. But once again, it had this kind of arrangement where people could rent out their top performing Axies, which are like Pokemon basically, to people that didn't have the money to actually buy them up front, which is what you had to do to get into the game to start with. And so it became this whole kind of two-tier system. The coziness of them is a broad church, I think.
Yes,
And it's about this, what actually I would say that the coziness has to have a positive side of it, because the cozy game mechanics can be used for games that are actually quite stressful and problematic.
Yeah.
And I would actually argue if you want to like capture cozy games, it has to have this kind of more positive.
We can talk as much as we want about like the subtext of games, but at the same time, cozy games, you can just play them.
Yeah. You
can just play them. Papers, Please is probably an exception because it's a deliberately political game, but you can just play them and you can just enjoy them.
Yeah.
And actually, that's also, like, we don't have to approach every single game as if it's kind of the most...
Not at all.
Rich
text, but rich
yeah,
text
totally.
possible.
Yeah. And I think, again, like, as academics, we're always looking and we're always finding things. But at the same time, I'm going to go home and play my game about geckos.
Yeah,
like,
I'm going to enjoy making, like, toy cars in a factory.
Yeah,
right?
totally. Right.
And
Long live
that-
capitalism.
Professors, is where we're leaving things today. We hope you enjoyed this episode. We have dug into the dark side of cozy games. We have dug into the light side of cozy games. We've done a little light environmental damage. So thank you both for joining me today. It's been enlightening. It's been super interesting. So don't forget, there's loads more episodes of Level of Detail on YouTube, our YouTube channel. So go and have a look, and bye for now.